On today's show, we're continuing our three-part series on navigating life after loss. Specifically today, we're going to be talking about the financial, legal, and practical steps to take in the first few weeks after losing a spouse. Welcome to another episode of the Simply Retirement Podcast, where we want to empower and educate women to live your retirement on your terms. I'm your host, Eric Blake, practicing retirement planner with over 25 years of experience, founder of Blake Wealth Management, and I would not be the man I am today without the women in my life. In our last episode, we talked through some of the most important first week steps after losing a spouse. We talked about things like death certificates, making funeral arrangements, being sure that you notify family, close friends, and professional contacts who may be able to support you and help you navigate those days ahead. If you missed it, I would definitely encourage you to go back and listen to that episode. Joining me once again is Wendy McConnell. Wendy, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Excellent. Well, things are all right with the world. I've got the grandbaby and the daughter in the house this week.
Ooh, so you get to enjoy the baby and be a grandparent, not a...
Yes, much better.
Not a baby watcher. Well, enjoy.
I definitely will. As in the last episode, I mentioned that my daughter's coming on board. So she's in town. She starts work tomorrow, as a matter of fact, as we're recording this. So she came in to do some training, get prepared, and then we'll go from there.
All right. Well, best of luck to everyone involved.
Thank you. Definitely exciting to have them both in there. And there's something special about having the family. So my son is actually, I don't know if I've shared this, he's actually still living with us. His plan is probably to move out in January, but there is just something special about having your kids back in the house. I love the empty nester thing. My wife and I love spending time together, but there's something about having all the kids in the house again is very special.
Well, that's why you have them, right?
That's why you have them, yeah. So eventually they can grow up, get out, and then just come visit.
Good for you.
So I had a question for you before we hop into today's episode. Was there anything in particular that jumped out at you from our last conversation about things to do in the first week of losing a spouse? Anything that stuck with you or surprised you maybe? I know you asked me about the death certificates and why you need so many, but was there anything else that hopped out at you?
No, I think what really was the most beneficial is to think about this stuff and plan for this stuff beforehand so that you're not caught off guard and not, in addition to your grieving, having to figure all this stuff out. So to plan ahead.
Well, and that's always the hard part because you never want to think about, anybody passing away, but it does make life so much easier. The guide that we're walking through in these 3 episodes that we're going to be sharing in the episode summary, it's designed to help you put all the pieces together, but it is much more easy to put those pieces together when there's not the emotional impact all on top of it.
Because you're not thinking clearly.
Absolutely. Well, and before we get into this, the things we're talking about are inspired by real life experiences. This guide was developed through work that we've done with widows over the years. It's also just a reminder that every journey is going to be different. And the biggest thing is none of us are meant to go through this alone. One thing also I wanted to touch on, especially with these first 2 episodes, when we're talking about the first few weeks after losing a spouse, there are going to be things that could have been done in the first week, but weren't. There's going to be certain things that maybe normally should be done in the first few weeks, but had to get done right away. So again, just know that every situation is different. Your story or the experience of someone close to you that may have lost a spouse, that timeline may be different. But our goal with this series and the guide that we've created is to help you avoid some of these missing pieces that are really important. Because sometimes those missteps can lead to financial stress or delays that make that grieving process even more difficult. Just as a reminder, you can download our guide, Navigating Life After Loss, a comprehensive guide for the newly widowed, by going to the simplyretirementpodcast.com or in the episode summary on the podcast platform that you're currently tuning in on. So as we get into, again, these first few weeks, we get past that first week, the shock, everything that goes with that, the emotions, and you start getting into the next few weeks, as difficult as it is, now is probably the time to start thinking about scheduling a meeting with your attorney if you have one. If you've got an estate plan in place, you've got your wills, you've got these pieces in place, you want to reach out to your estate planning attorney to start thinking about the probate process. And this is one of those that is really, the urgency level is going to be different based on the situation. We shared one situation or one story with a client where the deceased spouse had a number of different investment accounts where he was the only owner, it was just his name, and there was no beneficiary designation. So for her, the urgency level is a little bit greater to get the probate process started because that was the only way she was going to be able to utilize these assets.
Right. Now, I thought that an estate plan helped avoid the probate process.
There's a couple different components to that. So most people, it could be as simple as having a will. You have a will, that's what says, hey, here's what I want to happen to all my stuff.
Right.
But a will must still be probated.
Right.
Right. Where you would avoid probate and where some of these things could even be made a little bit easier is a living trust.
Okay.
So it's going to be very similar in terms of what it's trying to accomplish, but the methodology and how it accomplishes it is going to be different. The will always has to be probated. A living trust usually will not.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
So
absolutely.
in her case, for example, again, we talked about this in the last episode, but she had individual accounts that were in his name from different employers from his past work experience. She was not on it anywhere. But because they had just recently completed their estate plan, fortunately, you never want to think about those scenarios happening that quickly, but it had only been a few months, but since they had gotten those done, but she was able to start the probate process, get the what are called letters of testamentary, which says, hey, I'm the one that is able to make these decisions and move these assets around, and was able to get those assets into her name and then figure out what the best way to use those funds was going to be for her particular situation.
Right.
But this is where you want to start thinking about, okay, what property, what do I need to retitle any certain property, any vehicles, investment accounts? We've already touched on that. But again, depending on the legal requirements, the legal documentation that you may need, again, will depend on, do I have a will? Do these accounts have beneficiary designations? Are they in a joint ownership or individual ownership status? All those things need to be evaluated. And again, that's where this guide started listing those things out to figure out exactly what has to be done is so important.
Right.
You'd also want to think about, of course, if your spouse owned any business interests. Now is also the time to start thinking about what those next steps are going to be. If your spouse was a part owner in a business, what happens to that ownership? And was there a succession plan? Meaning, did they have it predetermined as to what was going to happen with their part of the business? So you want to start thinking about what that looks like and what steps you need to take there. Again, whether there needs to be an attorney involved, those kinds of things.
Yep.
We touched on in the first week, just kind of figure out what these financial accounts are that you have, whether it's bank accounts, investment accounts. But after you get past that first week and kind of start figuring things out, this is going to be a good time to begin thinking about closing certain accounts, updating joint financial accounts to individual ownership, putting those in your name. Also, for individual accounts, you'll need to make sure you confirm whether you're listed as a payable on death, as a beneficiary, or again, if that asset is going to need to go through probate.
Okay.
Beneficiary designations. This is where you want to start thinking about your own accounts. So of course, if you're married and your spouse, the past was the primary beneficiary, I got to start thinking about who do I change those beneficiaries to on my accounts. Again, I always say, hey, this is when you want to start thinking about it, potentially starting to do something within those first few weeks. Again, this is not one of those situations that is, I would call it extremely urgent, but you also don't want to forget about it. Of emotions and, okay, what do I do? Where do I go? What's my next step? What's my first step? These are, again, just a checklist of things you want to do, but that is one that you want to make sure you take care of, because that can create so many more challenges down the road if you just forget to change the beneficiary from your spouse. Now there might be extra steps in order for those assets to get passed down to your children or your grandchildren or wherever you ultimately want those to go. So you definitely want to start thinking about getting your own documents updated.
Yep.
We talked about retitling vehicles, property, again, all those types of things. You're going to have to start working on getting those into your name. Again, I see so many stories, especially when it comes to a house, of not thinking I need to do anything. And all of a sudden you've had the house that's in both names. One spouse passes and nothing's ever changed. You never changed that, put the house in your own name. And all of a sudden, okay, the second spouse, passes away. And now the children are figuring out, well, I've got to settle my father's estate. Now I got to figure out my mom's estate before I can actually do anything with the house.
Okay, well, what if the father passed 3 years beforehand and his estate is settled?
Yeah, hopefully that's the case. But you got to go through the process of getting the name changed into the surviving spouse's name.
Okay.
That's the tricky part. So if the children are trying to get both parents off the house because now they're both gone, that's where the difficulty comes in. You got to figure out how to get all that done. Even though one spouse passed away multiple years ago and maybe the other spouse passed away recently, if they're both on the house title, that creates some challenges.
Gotcha.
Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now let's get into Social Security. So again, to kind of think about our audience, if you've started Social Security or your spouse started Social Security, this topic deserves its own segment. So that's why we got this one broken out separately. So here's something that almost always takes people by surprise. If your spouse was receiving Social Security benefits, here's what usually happens. Benefits are paid 1 month in arrears. Okay. So meaning that if you're receiving a payment in, we'll call it, so we're at the end of July here, July's payment actually gets received in August.
Okay.
If your spouse passes away in April and that May deposit is not payable. But in most cases, it would be still paid into the account, in which case the payment then will likely be withdrawn by the bank.
Okay. So you're saying it's paid in arrears. So you're saying it's paid behind
Yes.
or ahead?
So your April payment that you're due for April is paid in the month of May. So you're paid 1 month in arrears.
Okay. So the payment that I get in May is really for April.
Yes.
Gotcha. Okay. Now that makes sense. Okay.
Wait, and this is the tricky part. This really becomes confusing because regardless, again, if a deceased person is no longer due a payment,
Right.
as harsh as that might sound, but depending on when they pass away within that month,
Right.
in many cases, the bank will still withdraw that payment and basically send it back. So if your spouse passed away late in the month and hadn't received the benefit for that month, you could still be eligible to get that, but now you got to file a form. You got to file form SSA 1724 to claim that benefit.
Okay. So the bank is sending it back to Social Security. Is that what you're saying?
If they've been notified of the passing, in most cases, they will return that payment to the bank, to the Social Security Administration. Yes.
Okay. So if I pass away at the end of the month, I may have claim to a portion of April's payment.
And it's not even a portion. So it's either were you eligible or were you not?
Oh, okay.
If you weren't eligible because you passed away after receiving the payment, then you're going to have that payment withdrawn, and that's it. And again, then they just pull it right out of your bank account. All of a sudden, you just see, $2,000 or $3,000, whatever, has been taken out.
Removed.
So if they were due, let's say, for example, if your spouse passed away April 30th, but the April benefit was scheduled for May 3rd, the Treasury may pull that back. So they may be withdrawn from your account.
Even if you were to the 30th, even if you lived the whole month, they're going to take that.
And that's the tricky part. So they may still pull it back, but if you live the entire month,
Okay.
you could still be due that payment.
Okay.
If it's withdrawn and you were due, now I've got to go through that process of filing that SSA 1724 to claim that benefit.
My question is, do you have all of these forms memorized, or are you reading from something right now?
I'm reading for something right now, yes.
Okay.
So I know the forms, but I had to make sure I put them all together. And just as a heads up, these are all in the guide. So just don't feel like you got to remember. Don't be writing these down. Okay, 1724.
But I wouldn't put it past you to know it by heart. That's why I had to ask.
Yeah, so a few of these notes, yes, I'm definitely reading just to make sure I don't overlook anything or miss something as we're going through this.
Good to know.
Now, here's the other key point. The 1724, this SSA form SSA is available on the Social Security website, but it's also important to know a couple of things. This is not applying for survivor benefits. This is only using this form to apply for a benefit payment that your deceased spouse was due. The other thing is you are required to notify Social Security if you have a spouse that is deceased. Receiving payments or keeping payments, more specifically, for a deceased spouse is considered fraud, right?
That's
a no-no. And those payments, if those are payments that have been received to a deceased individual, you have to get those back. You have to send those back, whether the funeral home notified Social Security or somebody needs to do it, and you need to get that money back to them in one form or another.
And keep in mind, there's going to be someone that contacts them if you don't. So
That's why the banks are so quick to do it, because they don't want to be held accountable for it either.
Nobody wants to get in trouble for
whether
this.
that individual was due the payment or not, they're sending it back.
Yep.
We'll put the 1724 form on you.
Yes, for sure.
But again, it's just an important part of this process, and one that almost triggers additional emotions. Well, why do I have to do this? I've lost my spouse, lost my husband. Now I got to figure out how to get this. Now they're taking money away from me.
Right.
It is almost always an emotional response to that happening. And again, because number one, so many people aren't aware that that's what happens.
Yes. Okay. Good to know.
Okay, so now talking about Social Security survivor benefits, and I want to make sure we go through this. We're not going to spend as much time as we might typically because we've done a full episode on this. So again, this is separate from returning benefits, meaning that if they did withdraw a benefit that you are due as a surviving spouse, that one-time payment, that's the 1724. Here, we're actually talking about Social Security survivor benefits, what you're going to receive on an ongoing basis if you've lost a spouse. So we'll touch on just some of the key things, but again, I'm going to refer you to episode 37 where we did the top 5 questions on Social Security survivor benefits. But a few of the key things, again, a survivor benefit, you're eligible as early as 60, maybe younger if you have dependents. So if this is a younger family, you're going to be eligible if they're under 18. You're going to be eligible for Social Security benefits under that circumstance as well. See, if you're receiving spousal benefits at the time of your passing, you might automatically get an increase to the survivor benefit because you're receiving a benefit based on that individual, the deceased record already. So that may trigger an automatic increase to the survivor benefit, but you still want to make sure you contact Social Security and say, hey, I need to apply for my survivor benefit if in fact that's what's most appropriate in your situation.
Okay.
And that's really where I want to talk about, if you are receiving your own Social Security benefit, the only way to switch to a survivor benefit is actually to schedule a meeting and go in and apply for that survivor benefit. Now, because you're eligible does not necessarily mean you should. And that's really where the planning, that's where episode 37 is going to be so valuable. So whether you should file for the survivor benefit, when to file, how it impacts your overall retirement plan, all those things, that's a big decision, bigger than many people realize. And so again, it may be smart to delay the filing of the survivor benefit or thinking about, do I have that option of switching benefits depending on your situation? Could I switch to the survivor later on?
Okay.
So again, we got a full breakdown of survivor benefits in episode 37, top 5 questions on Social Security survivor benefits. And you can get that, or you can go to that at the simplyretirementpodcast.com/37, just to make that easy. Okay, so now we get to things like debts. And what's my situation with any debts that my deceased spouse may have had? Credit cards, personal loans, medical bills. Unfortunately, that's always very frequently a scenario that we have to deal with if the spouse was going through a medical situation, or if they had been sick for a while, depending on the circumstances. You need to figure out what you're going to be legally responsible for. A lot of times medical billing offices, they may be willing to negotiate, especially if you are paying as the surviving spouse. So you want to start understanding what you're going to be responsible for when it comes to things like debts and especially credit cards and those types of things, where you may have some options that you might not be aware of.
Okay.
Also, again, just talking about the concerns about fraud and financial abuse and those types of things, you want to make sure you notify the 3 major credit bureaus, because you want to flag their accounts. So if anything happens, you want to try to prevent their identity from being stolen or their Social Security number from being utilized in some way.
Mm-hmm.
Also, again, of course, just continuing to monitor joint accounts, individual accounts for any unusual activity. If somehow somebody got a hold of their information, that's really one of the tricky parts where you got to really think about, do I put something in the newspaper when my spouse passes away? Because now it gets out there, this information gets out there. You asked the question about a will and going through probate versus a living trust and not going through probate. That's really one of the things these days that a lot of attorneys are actually talking about is, if you're going to go through that probate process and you just have a will, just know that's public record. That becomes public record.
Right.
So again, you really want to be careful about some of these things as you start checking off some of these boxes of things I need to do, being aware of some of the other potential implications that could follow if you're not paying attention.
So it's like a living trust, like a more in-depth process or something. Like, we've just heard about wills most of our lives, and now it's the living trust. I think that there was a theory that estate plans were for wealthy people and that us little people just got wills or whatever. So has there been like a shift, or is it just a more detailed process to get a living trust?
So a living trust is going to be more expensive.
Okay.
Because there is more that goes into it, but it accomplishes a lot more as well. So let's see, Susan Barnett, episode 22, I believe, that's where she was talking about the benefits of a living trust and why you might think about it. So I would definitely encourage people to go listen to that if they've got questions about why you would choose one or the other. But when you start thinking about, again, probate versus non-probate, is that now a reason to think about spending more money to avoid some of these huge potential hassles that could come with your information being out there? So if somebody can do a search online, come across, hey, this estate is being probated because that's all they had was a will, versus saying, okay, that's not going to show up because they had a living trust, right, and they avoided the whole probate process, that could be a reason. Now, everything is individualized, especially when it comes to estate planning. So if you're in a very simple situation where maybe all of your assets, you can have beneficiary designations or payable on death designations where it doesn't go through probate anyway, that might be a situation where maybe just a basic will is enough to cover some of the other stuff, because everything else is going to pass by what we call contract. But if you have a little more complex situation, or if again, security or privacy is a concern, that's where a living trust, even if you may not have a huge estate, but a living trust still could be a good fit depending on the circumstances. But if you got several real estate properties, if you got property in different states, all those types of things, that's historically been why you might consider a living trust. But these days, the privacy issues, all those could be definitely a valid reason for thinking about that as well.
Good to know. Good to know.
Final point here is, again, don't forget about your spouse's digital footprint. Email accounts, subscriptions, memberships, online platforms. You'll eventually want to address those. Again, you don't want to rush to shut those down though, because there may be some really important information that might be attached to those, especially when we're talking about emails, cell phones, anything where there might be information you need to access accounts or close accounts or whatever you might be needing to do. Make sure you take your time and figure out what stuff can I close, what stuff should I leave open for a while, because I might need access to that information.
Is there any guidance on social media? I mean, like, how do you even go about doing that? Like, when my mom passed away, we didn't know any of her information to get into, say, Facebook. So, it's 6 years later, the account's still there.
So there are now with different social media platforms, there are ways to say, okay, here's who would have access to my profile if something happens to me.
Okay.
Otherwise, there is I'm not sure what you would call it, basically a request, for lack of a better, whatever the right term is, that you can make to that social media platform just to notify them of a passing, so that then they can basically turn. And I've only seen this a couple of times, but like they could basically turn it into like a memorial account.
Oh, okay.
It still exists, but then obviously you don't necessarily want people posting and doing all kinds of stuff like that.
Gotcha.
So you'd have to decide, do I just have them shut that down, or do I, again, to turn it in some type of memorial account? But there are ways you can do that. Even the iPhones now, you actually can request to identify a contact. You say, okay, this is the person. If something happens to me and I forget exactly what it is, I should know that. Maybe I'll try to look that up for the next episode. But within your cell phone, there's a way you can identify, here's the person. It's like a legacy plan for your phone.
Huh. That's the person that's allowed to go
inside. If I
inside.
away, they're able to go in and access my account. And there's a process. I've done it with my wife. I put her as my primary contact, and she's done the same with me. But you say, okay, here's the person. They get a notification. They have to accept that they're the person. But at that point, yes, they can now access your iPhone data if that was necessary.
Through their phone, or do they have to go on your phone?
No, so they can access it through their phone. Yeah.
Oh, I don't know if I like that.
That's a whole nother conversation. We won't go into that.
Is that like a certain version though? Because I think I have like a 14 or something. So I think
that's probably one of the things they realize, hey, that this is a big problem here, that if the only way to access this person's data is by knowing whatever their code is, who knows how long it might take. We've seen these different stories of some of the bad stories that have been out there about so-and-so, mass shootings. I don't want to come up with too many examples,
right,
but hey, we need to get access to this phone. We got to figure out what their code is.
Right. Okay.
So that's really what we're talking about. And again, it should be part of your estate plan, really. Honestly, it should be what happens to the data on my phone, what happens to my social media. And there are ways of documenting that information as well. So I think that's definitely a critical step that would be included in this. And again, a lot of reference to this is in the guide that we're providing.
Okay. Sounds good.
Okay. Before we wrap up, just kind of taking a look at some of these important topics here. Again, a lot of this will feel overwhelming. That's really what the guide is for. The process is very heavy, but it's also important that unfortunately, we got to move forward in some form or fashion. And again, trying to make sure we understand where some of these things are going to fit in. When should I do this? When should I do that? Again, just as a recap, some of the key points, we got to close and update joint accounts, check beneficiaries of your own, talk to an estate planning attorney, especially if probate is going to be required. And even in the simplest case, husband and wife, often probate is still required. We actually just had a client that he passed away 5 months or so ago. We weren't for sure whether he was going to need to or not, but she reached out to her attorney. He said, yeah, here's what we need, here's why we need to go through probate. But at that point, she was, okay, I also need to reevaluate my estate plan. So we'll talk about that in the next episode as well. Is I got to figure out, how do I get my spouse's estate handled? But now I got to start thinking about what I need to do or what needs to change for my personal estate plan as well.
Okay.
Understand how Social Security handles deposits and whether or not you're going to be eligible for payback or even survivor benefits. And then we're going to start reassessing your own financial picture. Especially, we got to start thinking about, what's my cash flow situation going to look like, my housing situation, my estate planning needs. And again, you don't want to forget about monitoring for identity theft, and be sure that you're canceling any unnecessary subscriptions or memberships.
Okay, got it.
Anything else? Any other thoughts, clarifications on anything that we've talked about so far?
I think that you have taught me much today, so I thank you.
Excellent, excellent. Well, so actually in the next episode, we're going to start talking about that first year, starting to make some of these bigger financial decisions. We'll talk about the rule of 12 months, not making any big decisions within the first 12 months of losing a spouse, and whether that's accurate or not. So we'll spend a little bit of time on that. As always, thank you for tuning in. And again, a big thanks to Wendy for joining me once again on this episode. If you haven't already, be sure to download our free guide, Navigating Life After Loss, a comprehensive guide for the newly widowed. It's going to be available in the summary of this episode. And please don't hesitate to reach out to us directly if you're going through this transition and you need some guidance. We are here to help. That's it for today's episode. For all the links and resources that I have mentioned, you can visit the simplyretirementpodcast.com. Please be sure to like, follow, and share the show. Again, especially if you know someone who may be going through this process right now. Until next time, please remember, retirement is not the end of the road. It's the start of a new journey.
That's it for today's episode of the Simply Retirement Podcast. We hope you found our insights and advice helpful in planning for a fulfilling retirement. Don't forget to take action on what you've learned today. Visit our website at blakewealthmanagement.com to learn more about our firm and review our Simply Retirement Roadmap process to get you on the right path to the retirement you deserve. And don't forget to click the follow button to be notified when new episodes become available. Thank you for joining us on this journey, and we look forward to helping you achieve your retirement goals. Remember, retirement is not the end of the road. It is the start of a new journey. So embrace it and make the most of it. Until next time, take care. Content here is for illustrative purposes and general information only. It is not legal, tax, or individualized financial advice, nor is it a recommendation to buy, sell, or hold any specific security, or engage in any specific trading strategy. Results will vary. Past performance is no indication of future results or success. Market conditions change continuously. This commentary reflects the personal opinions, viewpoints, and analyses of Blake Wealth Management. It does not necessarily represent those of RFG Advisory, their clients, or their employees. This commentary should not be regarded as a description of advisory services provided by Blake Wealth Management or RFG Advisory, or performance returns of any client. The views reflected in the commentary are subject to change at any time without notice. Advisory services offered by investment advisory representatives of RFG Advisory, a registered investment advisor, Blake Wealth Management, and RFG Advisory are unaffiliated entities. Advisory services are only offered to clients or prospective clients where RFG Advisory and its representatives are properly licensed or exempt from licensure. No advisory services may be rendered by RFG Advisory unless a client agreement is in place.